Welcome to Life Stories. Sometimes, life takes unexpected turns, and the past we thought was buried comes rushing back in ways we never imagined. Tonight's story is one of regret, redemption, and second chances, a tale of a powerful billionaire who unknowingly abandoned the greatest treasure of his life. When fate brings him face to face with the daughter he never knew existed, will he find a way to mend what was broken, or is it too late? Stay with us until the end. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel to begin today's journey with life stories. The rain poured heavily against the windows, each drop drumming a steady rhythm against the glass, filling the small, dimly lit diner with an eerie sense of isolation. The storm outside was relentless, much like the thoughts swirling inside my head. I didn't belong in a place like this. Stepping inside, I shook the water from my expensive coat, barely concealing my irritation. The scent of frying oil and coffee lingered in the air, a far cry from the refined aroma of aged wine and seared filet mignon I was accustomed to. My name is Nathaniel Whitmore, though most people simply call me Nate. In the world of business, I was known as a man who built empires, who turned struggling companies into powerhouses. But here, in this unassuming diner on the outskirts of Boston, I was just another customer seeking shelter from the storm. The truth was, I had no business being here. My usual high-end steakhouse had been fully booked, and my business partner had insisted on meeting somewhere more relaxed. I had scoffed at the suggestion, but in the end, I relented. Yet, as I now stood in the dim interior of this establishment, regret seeped into my veins. The vinyl seat groaned as I slid into a booth, its worn-out edges a testament to the years it had endured. The laminated menu in front of me bore coffee stains and curled corners, signs of time and use. I skimmed it with disdain, tapping my fingers impatiently against the table. Before I could decide, a young waitress approached, notepad in hand. She couldn't have been older than her early 20s, dark hair tied back into a loose ponytail. Her uniform simple and unembellished. But there was something about her, something in her quiet confidence, in the way she carried herself, that made me pause for just a second. "Good evening, sir. What can I get for you?" Her voice was even, polite, but without the forced enthusiasm I had grown used to in places that relied on tips. I barely glanced at her. "Something edible, preferably," I muttered. To her credit, she didn't flinch. Instead, she offered a small nod, her expression unreadable. "Our house special is the best thing on the menu." I sighed, exhausted by the mere thought of debating my meal choice. "Fine, bring me that." She jotted it down and walked away, leaving me to check my watch, my irritation growing with every passing second. The storm outside only seemed to worsen, trapping me here longer than I wanted to be. This entire night had been an inconvenience, a disruption to my carefully managed routine. Minutes later, the plate was placed in front of me, steaming and carefully arranged. But the moment my eyes fell on it, my lip curled in disgust. "This is the house special?" I asked, lifting my fork with hesitation. The waitress nodded. "Yes, sir." I scoffed, my voice loud enough to draw the attention of nearby diners. "This looks like something you'd find at a homeless shelter." I sneered, pushing the plate away with distaste. "I came here for food, not whatever this is." The room fell into silence. Conversations died down, forks paused mid-air, and subtle glances were exchanged across tables. The air in the diner shifted, thickening with tension. The waitress inhaled sharply, her fingers tightening around the notepad she still held. But she didn't argue. She didn't snap back at me or roll her eyes like I expected. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket and pulled out something, a small, slightly crumpled photograph. Without a word, she placed it on the table in front of me. "Before you say anything else," she said quietly, "you might want to see this." Frowning, I picked up the photo, expecting some plea for sympathy, maybe a picture of a struggling employee or a local charity event. But the moment my eyes focused on the image, something inside me shifted. It was a kitchen, warm and inviting, with a woman standing in the center, holding a plate identical to the one in front of me. Her smile was radiant, her eyes filled with a kind of joy that was both familiar and deeply painful. My breath caught in my throat. My fingers trembled slightly as I turned the photo over, searching for something, anything, to tell me that this wasn't real. But it was. It was her, Rebecca, the love I had abandoned, the woman I had spent years pretending I had forgotten. The room suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. My pulse quickened, my stomach twisted in a way that had nothing to do with the food in front of me. Slowly, I lifted my gaze to the waitress. And for the first time, I really looked at her. The shape of her eyes, the way she furrowed her brow, the sharp yet delicate angles of her face. A creeping realization crawled up my spine. Cold and relentless. She looked like her. No, she looked like me. My blood ran ice cold. My grip tightened on the photograph as I struggled to control the rising tide of emotions crashing through me. The walls of the diner felt like they were closing in, the air thick and stifling. This wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't some random meal at a forgettable diner in Boston. This was something else, something I wasn't ready for. The waitress, Emily, as I later learned her name to be, stood before me. Arms crossed, watching me with quiet patience. There was no smugness in her expression, no satisfaction at having caught me off guard. She wasn't trying to humiliate me in return. She was just waiting. I cleared my throat, willing my voice to steady. Where did you get this? Emily's lips pressed together, her fingers tightening around the edge of her notepad. That's my mother, she said. Her voice didn't waver, but there was something there. Something deep, like she was holding back more than she was willing to say. Rebecca. The name burned through my chest like an ember catching flame. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. She had been my everything once, a woman who saw past my wealth, my last name, my father's influence. She had loved me not because of what I had, but because of who I was. And I had left her. I looked back down at the photograph, my vision blurring for a moment. The warmth in Rebecca's eyes was just as I had remembered, untouched by time. She was holding a plate, this plate, the one I had just pushed away with disgust. The realization hit me like a train. The food I had mocked wasn't just a meal. It was Rebecca's recipe, her legacy. I felt something shift inside me. Something I had long buried beneath years of boardroom negotiations and high-stakes deals. Guilt. I forced myself to look up at Emily again. And for the first time, I truly saw her. Her dark eyes, sharp and intense, so much like Rebecca's. The determined set of her jaw. The way her fingers twitched slightly against the notepad. Like she was bracing herself for whatever I was about to say. And then, like a cruel whisper in the back of my mind, a single thought surfaced. She looked like me. The air in my lungs vanished. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as my world tilted. I had spent my entire life believing I had no children. I had built my empire thinking I had no family, no attachments, no reason to regret the choices I had made. And yet, here she was. This wasn't just Rebecca's daughter. This was my daughter. The truth settled over me like a suffocating weight, pressing down on my chest, making it impossible to breathe. Emily misread my silence. She sighed, shifting her weight. She passed away a few years ago, she said, her voice softer now, more personal. Cancer. The word sent an ice-cold shiver through me. Rebecca was gone. I had spent years convincing myself that I would see her again one day. That if I ever had the courage, I could look her in the eye and explain. Tell her how much I regretted leaving. Tell her how much she had meant to me. But I had run out of time. And the only piece of her that remained was standing in front of me. Completely unaware of who I was. I swallowed against the tightness in my throat. I'm sorry. Emily's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Yeah, me too. I wanted to say more. Wanted to ask her 1,000 questions. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. Because nothing I said would change the fact that I had missed everything. Her first steps. Her first words. Her first heartbreak. I had missed 24 years of her life. And the worst part? She didn't even know I existed. The storm outside had softened into a gentle drizzle. But inside, the storm within me raged on. I sat there, staring at Emily, at the young woman who had unknowingly changed the course of my life in a single moment. She had no idea who I was. And yet, I knew now, without a shadow of a doubt, that she was my daughter. The weight of that realization crushed me. For 24 years, she had lived without me. And not because I had chosen to abandon her, but because I had never known she existed. My mind reeled back to the past. To the last time I had seen Rebecca. I had been 19, young, arrogant, and too blind to see what I was giving up. Harvard had always been the plan. Not just my plan, but my father's. Because in the Whitmore family, success wasn't an option, it was an expectation. I had grown up under the shadow of a man who believed that emotions were weaknesses. That love was a distraction. And that wealth was the only legacy worth leaving behind. And then I met Rebecca. She had been unlike anyone I had ever known, unapologetically real. Fiercely independent. She had loved to cook. Loved to feed people. Believed that a meal could heal wounds in ways words never could. I had fallen for her in the kind of way that left a mark on your soul. For one perfect summer, we had built a world together, one where my last name didn't matter. Where my future didn't belong to boardrooms and business deals but to late-night walks. Stolen kisses. And whispered promises. I had promised her forever. And then my father found out. You think love will make you successful? He had scoffed. Swirling a glass of bourbon in his hand. You think you can throw away everything I've built for some girl? She's not just some girl. I had snapped back, anger boiling inside me. Then prove it, he had said, his voice calm, ruthless. Choose her. Give up Harvard. Give up your future, your inheritance, your name. Choose her, and in 5 years, see what's left of you. I had felt the trap closing in around me. I had wanted to believe that love was enough. That Rebecca and I could make it work. But fear of losing everything, fear of proving my father right, had won. And so, like a coward, I had left. I just need time, I had told her, gripping her hands, trying to ignore the tears in her eyes. I'll come back for you. I swear. Rebecca had shaken her head, her voice breaking. No, Nathaniel, if you go, don't come back. And I hadn't. I had buried myself in my studies. In the corporate world. In building my empire. I had told myself it was for the best. That she would move on. That I would move on. That time would heal whatever wounds we had left behind. But now, sitting in this diner, looking at the daughter I never knew I had, I realized how wrong I had been. Rebecca had never moved on, not really. She had raised our child alone. She had built this diner from nothing. Kept her recipe alive. Created a life for the daughter I had never met. And she had tried to reach me. I felt sick as the truth unraveled before me. She had sent letters. Letters I had never received. Because my father had made sure of it. He had stolen those years from me. He had buried the truth. Ensuring that I never had the chance to make things right. And now, it was too late. Rebecca was gone. And the only thing I had left of her was standing before me. Looking at me like I was just another nameless, unimportant man who had walked into her world. I clenched my jaw, forcing down the ache in my chest. I had lost 24 years. But I would be damned if I lost another moment. I left the diner that night with my mind in turmoil. The cold Boston air bit at my skin. But I barely felt it. My thoughts raced, tangled in a knot of regret, anger, and something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years, grief. Rebecca was gone, and Emily, my daughter, had no idea who I was. The revelation had settled in my chest like a stone. Heavy and unrelenting. I had spent decades building a legacy. Securing my name in the business world. Making calculated decisions that left no room for uncertainty. Yet, in one evening, my entire existence had been thrown into chaos by a single photograph placed on a diner table. For years, I had convinced myself that I had done what was necessary. That sacrificing my personal life was the price of success. But as I walked through the rain-slicked streets of Boston, I realized that I had been a fool. Success had come at a cost. And now, I wasn't sure if I could ever fix what had been broken. The next night, I returned to the diner. Emily's eyes flickered with surprise when she saw me step through the door. But she masked it quickly. She didn't offer a greeting. Didn't acknowledge my presence beyond a slight narrowing of her gaze. I took the same booth as before. Feeling the weight of her unspoken questions settle between us like an invisible wall. When she approached, notepad in hand, her expression was unreadable. Let me guess, she said dryly. You're here to insult the food again? Her words were edged with defiance. But there was something else beneath them, curiosity. I shook my head. No, I said, my voice even. I was wrong about the food. I'd like to try it again. She raised an eyebrow but said nothing, scribbling down the order before walking away. And so, it began. Every night, I came back. At first, Emily was distant, her responses clipped, her eyes guarded, but she never told me to leave. She tolerated my presence, even if she didn't understand why I was there. The truth was, I wasn't sure either. I only knew that I needed to be close to her. I watched as she moved through the diner, balancing plates, exchanging quiet words with customers, her presence grounding the small space. She was efficient, focused, carrying herself with a quiet strength that reminded me of Rebecca. And little by little, something changed. She stopped flinching when she saw me at my usual booth. She stopped looking at me like I was an unwelcome intruder. One evening, as she placed my plate in front of me, she crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. So what's your deal? I lifted my fork. What do you mean? Emily huffed a quiet laugh, shaking her head. You're a billionaire, she said bluntly. I googled you. That made me smirk. Did you? She ignored the amusement in my voice. Why the hell are you eating here every night? I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I like the food. She scoffed. Liar. I chuckled but didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. She studied me for a moment, then exhaled sharply. Whatever. What are you having? I glanced at the menu but already knew my answer. The house special. Emily's eyebrows lifted slightly, as if she hadn't expected that. But she didn't comment. She just scribbled it down and walked away. I watched her go, feeling something shift inside me. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. But it was something. And for now, that was enough. I should have known the past wouldn't stay buried forever. For weeks, I had settled into a quiet rhythm, coming to the diner, sitting at the same booth, ordering the same meal. It wasn't about the food anymore. It was about her, Emily. I was careful, deliberate. I didn't push, didn't force conversation, didn't demand answers. I simply showed up, and in doing so, I gave her the choice to decide what to do with me. And, little by little, she had started letting her guard down. But secrets have a way of catching up with you, no matter how much you try to outrun them. It started with a letter. I had just walked into the diner when I saw her standing behind the counter, an envelope clenched tightly in her hand. Her knuckles were white, her expression unreadable. She didn't look up when I approached. Emily? I said cautiously. She exhaled sharply through her nose, shaking her head as if she were trying to contain something. Anger. Frustration. Maybe something worse. Then, finally, she lifted her gaze to mine. And I saw it in her eyes. She knew. You knew about the diner, she said, voice cold and sharp. I froze. She tossed the envelope onto the counter between us. I reached for it hesitantly, unfolding the letter inside. The words blurred for a moment. But I didn't need to read them. I already knew what it said. Emily's hands curled into fists. Your company was planning to buy the property, to redevelop the land, to get rid of it. I inhaled slowly. Emily, She held up a hand, stopping me. And let me guess, she said, voice trembling. You swooped in, played the hero, paid off the debts, and expected what? Gratitude? A pat on the back? That's not what this is, I said, my voice steady. Then what is it? She snapped, stepping closer. Because from where I'm standing, it looks a hell of a lot like guilt. Or maybe control. Maybe this was never about me at all. Maybe it was just about fixing a mistake before it could come back to haunt you. Her words hit harder than she knew. Because wasn't that exactly what I had done for most of my life? Controlled outcomes, fixed problems before they could become liabilities. But this wasn't about business. This was about her. I swallowed against the lump in my throat. Emily, I didn't know about you when I stepped in to save the diner. I swear to you, I didn't. If I had, I exhaled shakily, shaking my head. If I had known, none of this would have happened. She laughed, cold and bitter. And I'm just supposed to believe that? Yes, I said firmly, because it's the truth. Emily's jaw clenched, her throat bobbing as she struggled with something, anger, doubt, maybe even the smallest flicker of hope that I wasn't lying to her. I took a step closer, lowering my voice. You think I don't regret every second I missed? You think I don't wake up every morning wishing I had known? That I had fought harder for your mother? For you? Her breath hitched slightly, and for the first time since this conversation started, I saw something crack in her armor. But it wasn't enough. She shook her head, stepping back. I don't need you, Nathaniel. The way she said my name, not dad, not father, not anything close, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. I nodded, swallowing down the ache. Maybe not, but that doesn't mean I'm going anywhere. Emily's lips pressed together, her eyes dark with something unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. And for the first time since I had found out about her, I wasn't sure if she'd ever come back. The days passed slowly after that night. Emily didn't ban me from the diner. But she might as well have. She wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak to me unless absolutely necessary. Our uneasy truce had shattered into something far worse, silence. I had spent my entire life negotiating with the most ruthless businessmen in the world. Bending people to my will with carefully chosen words. With power. With influence. But none of that meant anything to Emily. She didn't care about the name Whitmore. Didn't care about the weight it carried. And, God help me, I didn't want her to. I just wanted her to see me. Not the billionaire. Not the man who had unknowingly almost taken everything from her, but her father. If only I had the right to call myself that. Days turned into a week. And I did the only thing I could do. I stayed. Every evening, I returned to the diner. I sat in my booth. Ordered the house special. And waited. Waited for a sign that she didn't hate me. Waited for a chance to fix what I had broken. Even if I didn't know how. Then, one evening, something changed. Emily walked over, her steps hesitant but deliberate. She placed a steaming cup of coffee in front of me, the porcelain clinking softly against the table. I looked up at her, my chest tightening. A peace offering. I reached for the cup but didn't drink from it right away. Thank you, I said, my voice low. She crossed her arms, exhaling slowly. I have rules. I raised an eyebrow. Rules? If you're going to keep coming here, she said, tilting her chin up, then you're going to follow them. Something warm, something dangerously close to hope, stirred in my chest. I'm listening. Her dark eyes flickered with something unreadable. 1. She held up a finger. No hovering. I don't need you watching me like I'm some fragile little thing about to break. I nodded. Understood. She lifted a second finger. 2. No trying to buy your way into my life. The words hit hard. But I deserved them. She continued. I know you think money fixes everything. But this isn't a business deal. You don't get to throw cash at it and expect everything to be fine. I exhaled sharply but nodded. Fair enough. Then she hesitated, lifting a third finger more slowly than the others. 3. If you're serious about this, about getting to know me, you don't get to disappear again. The vulnerability in her voice almost undid me. I sat up straighter, meeting her gaze with unwavering sincerity. You have my word, Emily. I'm not going anywhere. She studied me for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether or not she could believe me. Then, finally, she nodded and walked away. I sat there for a long time, staring at the untouched coffee in front of me. It wasn't much. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was something. And for now, that was enough. The road ahead wasn't easy. Emily didn't suddenly trust me overnight. She didn't call me dad or let me into her life like the years of absence had never happened. And I didn't expect her to. But she let me stay. Day by day, our conversations became longer, the silences less hostile. She stopped flinching when I entered the diner. She let me see pieces of her life, the way she cared for her customers, the way she fought to keep the diner running, the way she still held onto the recipes her mother left behind. And, in turn, I let her see me. Not the billionaire, not the powerful businessman, just a man who had made mistakes. A man who had lost too much time. A man who, for the first time in his life, was willing to fight for something real. One evening, as she wiped down the counter, she glanced at me and said, You know, You don't have to keep coming here every night. I smiled. I know. She hesitated, then sighed. But, I guess you can stay. It wasn't an invitation. It wasn't an acceptance. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings were all we needed. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow Life Stories for more incredible tales of love, redemption, and second chances. See you in the next video.